Okay, so today is June 5th, 2022, and we're continuing our Desiderata Extinctionati meeting. There's no set agenda today, but actually Gary wanted to, pose the question regarding the flippening and how, the discussion first about if you want to talk, Gary, but don't look up if that covered what the flippening covered, what he wrote about, and considering everything that's happened, the war with Ukraine, certain diseases, the economies of the world, does that already eclipse the flippening? And so for me, I think, with the way Hugh posed the flippening, it was a way to catch people's attention, and that in the way the world is going. But the way things are now, I do think that our attention is going to these things that are happening right here, right now, right? The events that are happening are eclipsing the flippening. And actually, I'd say since Hugh passed, things started ratcheting up a little bit, right? I don't think Hugh even foresaw these events happening so soon, and I think that flippening was a way to prepare us for that. But it looks like it's happening right here, right now. I mean, of course, it's not happening quickly in some places, but we're starting to see it. And but what does everyone think, or any thoughts about this?
Yeah, it's an interesting point actually. That just Hugh proposing the flippening, preparing just even us for what un, began to unfold fairly well at the same time that he went. That's an interesting point actually. Um, the other thing that's just occurred to me too is uh, regarding the current world events and that is the importance of not allowing that to be an all-consuming distraction from, um, I guess the central issue of attending to your own state of awareness. It's very easy to get immersed in all this great, massive unfolding of events and lose yourself in that rather than maintaining an awareness of your center. Um, yeah, it's just those two things came to mind just then.
Yeah, thanks for that reminder, Gary, because there are a lot of distracting things that take away our um, attention, and there's a lot of whipping up of fear, which is nothing new. But yeah, so thanks for the reminder. And I think Lord Hugh did caution us about that, not to get too involved or attached in like mainstream media, listening all the time, the fear mongering, even being interested so much in politics, thinking that whomever we vote or that voting uh, makes a whole lot of difference. Maybe in our local communities, it does, but in the bigger scheme of things, like the national leaders, I think it would just be makyo to get burnt up about current events.
Yeah, I guess uh, there also seems to be what could be perceived as a kind of a desperation on the part of these people to um, that maybe their distractions aren't working well enough because they seem to be bringing on many of them at the same time. Now they're getting multiple major distractions at the same time. That if the war wasn't enough, then we had to have the food shortage, then we had to have the inflation, then we had to have great fiascos with guns in America, and indiscreet statements being made that could provoke China, and it's as though um, there's this mass bombardment, um, which on the one side of it, yeah, abortion, of course, Tolstoy, of course, yeah. Um, um, of course, they're all uh, most of those are valid things. Uh, but on the other side of it, it just sort of seems rather suspicious that there's such a concatenation of them, all at once. Um, and I guess you have to ask, what's the agenda here? Do you go down a conspiracy theory pathway about, what these naughty elites have got in mind, and why they're trying to completely bamboozle us with all of these distractions all at once? Or is there no conspiracy theory at all? You could go. Hugh and I discussed the um, the idea of the Kali Yuga, which is the fourth age, the final age of the great cycle, which is characterized by chaos and a great acceleration in time and general decay and all this kind of thing. So you could be looking at this from a sort of a mythological, sort of Eastern, um, apocalyptic, um, uh, cycle in time, as aligning with what is going on at the moment. Um, I mean, possibly what we need to be looking at is what are the lessons for us as people who are trying to retain our focus on what's real and what's authentic, um, and not get led up the garden path. So, uh, yeah, I guess that's just my thought at the moment is uh, just navigating that space uh, of preserving not just your own sanity but um, uh, uh, your own state of awareness during all this.
Well, isn't it the nature of this Moloch machine to self-destroy. And I've never been somebody who got much interest in conspiracy theories, because everything is really, or maybe, but I really don't like the cabal stories of a group of people who are trying to do this and that. There is plenty of organizations that got their self-interest at heart, and that are trying to help each other. I'm not denying that there are such groups, but what I mean, I don't go into this kind of thing of there's this group of people who are maneuvering so that we're going this way and that way. I really think, and I read something, I can't remember which article it was, somebody posted a very interesting article, I read it about that, and it's 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 like it's written in the making of this meta alien cortex construction, that machine, this enormous system that we're in, that it's self-destroying itself. What do you think?
Yeah, actually, what you're reminding me of is a conversation we had a few days ago where I think we touched on that. And I'm just trying to bring back what we were saying, which, yeah, we remember we were talking about China. Oh, okay. Yeah. Look, I don't know if this might be getting off the track a little bit, but it might lead us back to it. So I'll try and get it out. Which is, Sophie and I were having a discussion a few days ago about the lockdowns in Shanghai, which have continued for quite a long time, and I said, made the comment that. Uh, a lot of the commentary about that seemed to be rather superficial. That people were saying, "Oh, it's just these Chinese are just such slaves to their own ideology that they've got this zero COVID policy, and they're going to cling to it and uphold it to the bitter end." As though they're remarkably stupid people who just would do that to their own detriment. And maybe they would to a degree, but I felt that there probably was a deeper reason why they were going through the exercise of locking down Shanghai for so long. And Sophie and I were talking about that. And another a video popped up on YouTube where this was being discussed, and in that video they suggested that actually no, that the reason why Shanghai was being locked down was that Xi Jinping was attempting to reconstruct himself along Maoist lines and reassert a much more authoritarian state of affairs. And what he was doing was using Shanghai as a test case, that if he could get away with very rigid control there in 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 a city that was probably one of the sort of more free, more liberal cities in China, that if he could get away with that degree of control there, he could get away with it in the rest of the country, and then roll out I guess probably the idea behind it was probably felt that China was getting a bit too much Western influence and wanted to roll it back to an earlier time, um, in terms of his power and all the rest of it. Um, and Sophie and I were talking about that, and I still had the feeling that even that wasn't a reason that was going really getting to the crux of the matter. Um, and I'll just have to go a little bit slowly here because I've got to refer back to a couple of notes. I can't keep this all in my mind. Um, uh, what did we talk about? Uh, uh, the Yeah, Sophie was mentioned the idea of absurdity. Is it why are countries just descending into this case, into this state of self-destructive absurdity? And I think that's where we got onto a comparison of both China and the EU. In the case of Shanghai, they appear to be deliberately and very forcefully pursuing a line of action which was absurd, that it wasn't achieving anything. And because, for instance, Shanghai is the major economic center in China, that the Chinese were actually threatening crashing their own economy by keeping such a large center closed down for such a long time. And in thinking of that, realizing that this is exactly the same process that the EU is currently engaged in, that apparently they're on this bitterly determined path to deliberately crash uh, the European economies as well. Um, and then I guess we got uh, towards the end. Our point was, well, what was the agenda behind uh, these two major players on the world stage apparently wanting to deliberately crash their economies? And this is just getting back to where we were a minute ago, where Sophie was just talking about the Moloch, which was that we then started to say, well, hey, this is could be out of the realm of human beings, that we're not actually talking about human beings now. We're talking about the machine. We're talking about systems which have their own momentum and their own agenda. The machine's not a human being. Um, it's kind of this huge system that has kind of taken over humanity in its own right, even though humanity constitutes it. Um, and the point is, uh, we seem to be going through these stages where the system um, is successful for a while, which it has been during the 20th century, but it gets into a state of kind of diminishing returns for the amount of effort it puts into trying to expand itself. So, and this comes out in terms of energy and economic maneuverings and all the rest of it, where we end up in the stage where we are now, which is a kind of uh, economic paralysis because nothing else can be done with the twisted up monetary system. Um, and then, so you go from that stage of diminishing returns to the stage of the system beginning to defeat its own purpose. In other words, everything it tries to do to make things better just makes them worse. And we also seem to be in that situation now. And then the final stage is also now becoming apparent, where the system starts to destroy itself, where in its efforts to keep itself going, it actually ends up being self-destructive. And that was where we sort of came back to the example of China in the EU. Is that an example of the system becoming in its end stage, in its dying throes, becoming so dysfunctional and twisted that it's actually destroying itself? Um, yeah, so that was basically the discussion we had, and we finished off with the example of the poem. What was the name of the poem, Sophie? Do you remember? I've forgotten it. Percy Bysshe Shelley, um, the one with Ozymandias. I'm probably not pronouncing that correct. The King
I'm
of
looking for
Dust.
it now. 1 second. I know you. It was Aussie. Oh, I'll put a link when I'll get it. I have a.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Just put it up because the
Um,
poem has got just a little segment in it.
it's
Hang on, I'll
Ozymandias
try and
by Shelley. I met a
yeah. Hang
traveler
on.
from an antique land. Yeah.
That's right. That's the one. Yeah.
I'll find it and I'll post it.
Maybe I can
Hang on.
comment. Maybe I can
Yeah.
Yeah,
comment while you
go
find
ahead.
the
Yeah.
poem. Yeah,
Oh,
because
hang on. Here it is.
yeah.
Here it is. I'll just read it
Okay.
out, Torstein,
Yeah.
before you, and then you can have the
Yeah. Yeah.
stage if you like. It was about, this mythical king who'd fallen from grace and ended up being the king of nothing. And it seemed to me to always have a point to make about the kind of, I think about the pretensions of elites in the world we're living in at the moment. where they seem to be so desperate to hang on to power, but they don't realize that they're creating a world that's just going to be a wasteland. So what the hell is it do they think that they're going to be in control of? And the poem ends with this stone bust of the king on a pedestal, and it says, "And on the pedestal these words appear: My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look upon my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away." You know, in other words, he's just left to be king of absolutely nothing at the end of the day, and all the pretensions came to nothing. Um, and it just seemed to be an appropriate thing at the time when Sophie and I were talking to finish the conversation with that. But anyway, I'll let you go on, Torstein.
Yeah, I think it makes sense absolutely to there are some signs that look like the EU is sort of self-collapsing and things are not making sense, etc., etc. Or from another perspective, they are too good to be true. And when it's like that, it's always it's often too good to be true. So it's not true. So I think the first thing we have to remember when the EU is sort of cutting up its body with a bread knife and sort of chopping off its limbs and stuff, which is it's doing now in an economic sense. We have to remember that the EU, the Europe, is not a country, not a union, not a continent. It's just a big slave of America. You have the U.S. empire, and they decide everything, right? Just like they decide everything that goes on in the Ukraine. You know, it's not like uh, whatever the name of the leader in the comedian in Ukraine is. It's not like he is running the show, right? He's just a puppet for
He's a
Washington, right?
puppet, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So it's like when Germany, the massive economy of Germany, which is the sort of the engine of the European Union, is sort of doing totally counterintuitive and self-harming actions, saying that, oh no, we don't want any energy from Russia. You know, that's not them talking. That's basically America talking, and they're just moving their lips, right? So the way I see it, America knows very well now, geopolitically, they are losing the grip of the global economy. They're losing the petrodollar. The petrodollar, for those who don't know, is an artificial way to prop up the economy or the currency of America by forcing everyone to trade oil and gas in the dollar. So basically, you have to, if let's say Finland wants to buy oil from Russia, they have to first buy dollars from America and then pay the Russians in dollars. Of course, the Chad move of Putin and Russia, as soon as this war started in Ukraine, was to say, yeah, of course, sure, you can buy oil and gas from us. You just have to pay in rubles, right? And for somebody who has studied geopolitics, that was, okay, yeah, I see what you do there. Very smart. And yeah, but I think it's important that we don't sort of choose sides and look at this like a football game or something, football match. But it's geopolitics, and the rules of the game have been around for hundreds of years, and some of the players are clever playing it, but uh, yeah, if you focus down on a detail like what is Spain doing or what is Germany doing, it doesn't make any sense if you don't see the big picture, where America is ruling everybody, and we are their slaves.
Yeah, I just before I came on meeting. There's listening to a thing on YouTube, which could be relevant. Hang on, I'll just read out what it is in case anyone else wants to do it. The channel is called Redacted, and it's a pretty well a right-leaning thing. And their edition, they're having a conversation with a fellow called Larry Johnson, who is an ex-CIA person. This is dated 4th of June on Redacted. One of the things that one of the questions that was asked to this fellow was, in terms of American interference and action in countries overseas, how well scripted is it, and how intentional is it, the things that they were doing? Were they really sitting down and working through what they were trying to do, what likely outcomes could come of it, and what their responses were going to be? Um, and it was interesting. This fellow's replies were a little bit contradictory. On the one hand, he said, no, there's not much of that goes on. There's not a lot of serious sort of planning, thinking through the consequences of what America's doing, like he was citing, Afghanistan and Iraq and all these interferences that America's been engaging in for a long time. Um, uh, and Because I haven't finished it, but I'm just didn't so I can't sort of conclude what the guy said. But he did say, yeah, they do script this to some extent, but the impression I had was not as much as you might think. And I'm wondering whether that's coming out now in terms of Ukraine, that they have scripted this to a certain extent, but haven't thought it through far enough, and it's now backfiring for them, giving um, undesirable results such as the undermining of the petrodollar. Whereas, I don't know, just my personal impression is that uh, the Russians seem to have been just taking a very quiet attitude, and that they have thought through this very carefully and know what they're doing. I don't know. Has anyone got a comment about that? It does seem to be a bit of a disparity. The US seems to be behaving strangely, and not indicating that careful thought has preceded what they're doing.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think Russia is behaving very carefully and planned, relatively. But I also think that America has known for a long time that it would come to an end for their dominance, for their economic dominance, and for the dollar hegemony. So I don't agree that was a total surprise for them that Russia would pull the petro currency card. I think all of these things were known before the war started, and but I still think that the main sort of headline here is that this is an apocalyptic war for the end of the US/Western hegemony in the world. So it's not just like some kind of border clashes down in Eastern Europe. This is like where America ends and China Russia takes over. So that's kind of the only thing that makes this interesting, that because it's like you had like 2, 3, 4, 500 years of Western dominance, discovering America and ruling China and all of these things, and now the whole thing goes to the east, and the east takes over, basically.
I'm wondering whether is it any more a matter of nations. In other words, given the extraordinary influence of transnational corporations and extremely wealthy people, that that the sort of end of the American dominance, um, it's just sort of like a symptom of the power structure uh, being focused in a different place rather than an actual different country, or instead of Russia and China being sort of dominant instead of America. That might happen, but it's just sort of symptomatic of uh, people in wealthy and powerful positions, and large corporations just sort of moving their allegiance from one place to the other, and that they are that is the real influence, and not the actual nations themselves.
Yeah, I think you can see what Israel is doing. So Israel is definitely moving their funds and their money into Asian economies. So and not being anti-Semite, but some people say that those guys know about money and how money works, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Yeah. Um, I think there was somebody else on this call who is going to say, no, I'm not an anti-Semite, but I've got some things to say, but I won't talk for you. Um, um, yeah, sorry, I just uh, not quite sure where to take the discussion from there. Has anyone else got
Yeah, but to come
a
back to
comment?
what we were saying at the start, if I may add, is that we're still kind of witnessing a machine, a moloch, a beast that is the system, our civilization that has been built, and we know how, and we've discussed that at length with you and after him. And we can see that the measures that this civilization is taking to protect itself, whether it's through what we're talking about, conflict or money, are uh, are bringing it to its end, and
Mm,
it's shooting itself in the foot. But it still it can only act with its own intelligence, that form of cleverness that is not wise. And that's what we're witnessing. Like everybody's saying, why is Europe doing this? Like, why are they doing? Because the system is rigged for these sort of measures to be taken, because that's not even, I don't think it's even any wise guys in his office who's deciding that. It's the way things are rigged in the system. So it's taken out of anybody's, I was going to say control, but it's another form of control. It's a control. The civilization itself is acting like an entity. Do you see what I mean?
well, see, this comes back to what we were saying earlier about faulty and the kind of activist agenda is that the forces that are acting are just so huge by comparison that it's you have to seriously ask yourself whether what they're doing is having any effect at all. Um, Actually, just thinking back, Sophie, towards the end of that conversation with Faulty, where he said uh, that what was important was to be um, at the end to to have some to have some grace, uh, and I think this is where his spiritual understanding must be coming out. Uh, because this brought up in my mind two things that Hugh was on about. One was, you know, the fact that you would want to do the right thing, not because of any result that you might get or any influence that it might have, but simply because um, doing the right thing is I don't know, it seems cheap to say fulfilling, but you know, you just simply do it because it's the right thing. But also, also as well, his notion of ataraxia in the end times, and I think that's probably what Roger meant when he used that word, that grace. Sophie, do you remember exactly what he said at that point towards the
I
end? Because
remember, I remember very well when he used the word grace.
mm,
Um, used it in the context of talking about a culture of resistance, but I can't remember the whole context. Now, I just want to say to other people who might not know that we had a conversation with Faulty, with Gary, a few days ago to give him all the info we had on the ark so that he could do what he wanted with it, because we were going to meet with him in sometimes in February, March, after Hugh passed away, and Gary and I were too tired and we just couldn't do it, so we cancelled the meeting. But we got an appointment with him a few days ago, and we had a quick, no, we had an hour talk with him and Blondie, and we kind of unloaded everything we knew about the ark and the people, the contacts. It's going to be followed up, and we just, told him that we don't have the backbone and the knowledge and the capacity to develop this thing. And so we had, yeah, we mostly talked about the ark, but then he went on to more general subjects. And at the end, it was actually very inspiring because, yes, he used the word grace. I'm trying, I wish it was an unrecorded meeting. So I didn't take many notes.
yeah, no,
Um,
I know I'm annoyed
I
because
was
I was
listening to
taking
him.
notes.
He was very, very inspiring,
He
actually.
was very inspiring. I think we brought him out, Sophie, because I was well, I mean, I genuinely did want to tell him how impressive he is as a person when you get into a private conversation with him. That it's quite a different persona to what you see if you just get onto a YouTube video and watch him giving a fire and brimstone speech to the troops, and then at the end of it saying, "Hey, and now that the situation's hopeless, please go to jail for the cause." But there's a whole other Roger that I think generally people aren't aware of. And during the conversation that we were having, uh, uh, just one of the things I was wanting to say to him was, it might be beneficial for him in overcoming people's. I mean, a lot of people have a pretty negative opinion of him, and it might be a way to overcome that if he revealed himself more as the person he really is, rather than the sort of activist recruiting fellow for or how can I put it? Like trying to get the troops incredibly enthusiastic and go along with the next action or the next thing that's in mind. And yeah, I think at that point, because the conversation had gone in that direction of his, uh, I mean, really, to be honest, I think um, it, it, uh, he is a person uh, who is a spiritual master himself, and uh, you know that's an aspect of him that it probably needs to come out at this stage, and I think it's talking that along those lines was what must have got him onto talking about grace. in the end times, and he was actually talking about, you know, a new religion, and I think by that he probably meant a a return to a more spiritual perspective on what was happening. Um, yeah, and it is a great pity that neither Sophie and I took down sufficient details to to sort of regurgitate that for everybody, because it was probably right at the end of our conversation was probably the most important thing that was said. But I think we were sort of a little bit in awe at that moment and didn't fully sort of capture it, unfortunately.
Yes, because I'm looking at my notes now, and I've written the word "great" really big, and then just after that, I was written "send the manifesto" because he wanted to, he wanted to have another look at it. But yeah, I think we were, because you told him, if my memory is good, you told him what you have to say. You're saying, you need to appear as you are when we have a conversation like that. Like
Mm.
the Roger that people need to see, and I think that gave him wings to start, and he got really inspired. And then I stopped writing. I stopped taking notes. I just listened.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think the trouble with notes is that they're in inverse proportion to the importance. Like, there's something really important going on, you can't spare the time to be scribbling notes. You're paying attention, and then if there's something not important going on, you've got plenty of time to sit there and write it all down. But it doesn't matter.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah.
um,
I think
Yeah, I
he'd like
guess,
to consider.
but
He'd like to consider the ARG. He'd like to. He's going to pursue on his with his crowd, with our document. He's going to pursue the idea in the States. So I mean, it was a positive interaction. Sorry, Torstein, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
no, it's fine. But I guess, like grace or not, or whatever those notes were. I think it's still a question for any ecological or climate activist or community, whether or not you're going to fight to prolong the reign of this industrial civilization, which Faulty is doing, has been doing, always has been doing, by trying to make it some kind of better or a light version of the industrial machine, and the other side, which is working to end industrial civilization as soon as possible, which turns out to be the best solution for everybody living on this planet, all the other species and stuff. So it seems to me, although I was very keen to follow Faulty and XR at the beginning, back and forth, but I kind of strongly supported them sometimes along the way. But in the larger picture, they are sort of cheering on the major team, which is Team Industrial Civilization, which is bringing everything to a grinding halt. So yeah, I think in retrospect, I don't support him. I don't support XR. I think.
Isn't
well,
it
this
an absolutely tiny minority of people, even at this point, who are capable of questioning the necessity of industrial civilization? I mean, I think it's such an obscure idea that I don't know. I never met anybody who has this idea outside of like a tiny minority of like nutters on the internet. Which, like, for me, I kind of take for granted now, as Torsten was saying, the end of industrial civilization would be the best thing, and the sooner it happens, the better, albeit the consequences of that are going to be extremely unpleasant for a lot of us. But yeah, isn't this like the most obscure? Does Roger or anyone else in that sort of mainstream thing, do they have any idea about industrial civilization being a bad thing? Or, do we take for granted that you can question the existence of civilization because we all talk to each other and we all have our issues with it, but when you talk to like the most enthusiastic environmentalists in the normie world, the concept of anything outside of windmills and solar saving the world seems to be complete anathema to anyone.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem that Roger's in contradiction. Like for instance, well, at least XR. I mean, I suppose strictly he's been kicked out of XR in the UK. But as Hugh pointed out, in terms of their demands to government, they're appealing to the same authority system that that by expecting the authority system to do something different or change, they're still supporting it. They're still supporting some kind of top-down, hierarchical thing that it essentially just maintains the status quo in a different form. But the interesting thing was Hughes said that when he came back from the meeting with Faulty and Blondie, so that they were both absolute doomers and completely got the fact that we were completely screwed and there was no way around that. And yet continue on this pathway that seems to, that supports these that apparently supports the green business as usual agenda. And so, there appears to be a contradiction there. And I mean, Sophie and I didn't address that kind of thing with them when we were talking to them just the other day because, well, it wasn't really the purpose of the call, and we didn't want to get too deeply. We really didn't want to go down the path of challenging what they were on about.
Well, do you know what I'm thinking, Barry? You introduced this meeting by saying that we're going to talk about the flippening and that the movie Don't Look Up might have taken a sort of precedence about, and suddenly might be a better. I'm not putting it right the way you said it anyway, but everybody heard what you said, and then you said that the war took our attention and that the flippening is also taking a little bit backstage at the moment, but it's the same. I mean, what I see in this Don't Look Up thing is not what everybody was talking about, like the climate thing or whatever. I think what Bob is saying is that the elephant in the room is the civilization, and you don't look up to the civilization. You don't look up at that. It's taken. It's the thing that you don't question. And when Bob is saying this about a little bunch of people on the internet or in the woods, like the likes of some people who have gone to live off grid, like Mark Boyle or some people around that I know, or else Deep Green Resistance, Uncle Ted, but all that is as a little bunch of people in the world. Nobody wants to look up to big civilization. No, and even for ourselves, it's a challenge. So we can only make our voice heard because we're using the internet.
Yes, it's just even the idea, like I couldn't be further away personally from actually being in an uncivilized state. I'm a city boy living in a city, doing city things, and even though I've sort of chosen to not participate in certain things that are taken for granted, like using cars and aeroplanes as much as possible, like I can't. I don't even know how to conceptualize like doing something outside of civilization, but I get the idea that civilization is like the problem, and in terms of having to confront the consequences of climate change and pollution and whatever the shit show humanity's created. Understanding, of course, civilization is a major problem. Even just the idea of that, it seems like completely obvious to me, and at the same time, it's again, even to discuss that with anybody outside of this like tiny little circle of people, or again outside of the likes of Derek Jensen, and so on. There's a couple of, sort of Amprim types who are open to this idea. But it surprises me how incredibly well conditioned everyone is. That, yeah, as you're saying, they don't look up. It's like, well, it's really the analogy of the fish not knowing about the water, and to sort of question, oh yeah, what is this all about? And I do contemplate myself like, okay, well, if I found myself not in civilization as an individual, it's almost like a meaningless thing to contemplate, because I don't go camping much, or I don't, if I go in nature, my personal experience in the United Kingdom is that I see a sort of wasteland of this place that used to be a forest. And then, some over the last few thousand years, they've chopped down every single tree on this island to make eventually ships and whatever they did with it. So I don't know. I just see this like already weird landscape. I can't imagine what being without civilization would be. And at the same time, it's like, well, invariably, I think well, some of us are probably going to find out what it's like, and maybe it'll be like some sort of Mad Max type of reality, or maybe there will be a scenario where there's the collapse that we like to talk about, occurs, where the economy ceases to function and electricity ceases to function. But maybe there's some strange scenarios where people still get to use petrol engines, or using, I don't know that civilization will completely end like this. Yeah, sorry, over to you.
Yeah, I was going to use the fish tank and the water metaphor, but you did it before me, so I'll just say something else about water. So 8 years ago, I was up in the forests above Norway, and when I needed a break, and the guy I met needed a break, we had a chat and a cigarette. And this guy was working the waterworks for Oslo, so he was going around making sure that no trees or branches got stuck in the thing, so yeah. So basically, he was a worker for the Oslo Waterworks, and I was far into the collapse literature and reading about that kind of stuff. So I asked him directly, on a Saturday, Sunday afternoon or something, how long, if there is a collapse of society in Oslo, how long after that day collapses can we still drink the water? And he said, well, about a day, 1.5 days. So basically, even though you think that getting clean water from the lakes down to the taps in the city is an easy thing and doesn't require chemicals or workers or human supervision, it actually does. And so you basically break down the entire water supply in a city like Oslo or London within a day or two. Then you can no longer drink the tap water. And so those kinds of things are quite interesting, I think, because it's we don't think about how much goes into just getting enough water down to the tap.
But I think
Yeah,
it's not just about practical things like water. Civilization isn't. We're talking about a totally different way of thinking. We're talking about if the end of our civilization doesn't just mean the end of water and the water in the taps. It doesn't mean the end of electricity. It goes to much deeper thing, and it goes back again to spiritual aspect of our connection with the world, with nature, our connection with everything, our non-duality. And that's why I think that it's so difficult to grasp by a lot of people nowadays. I think it would have been easier to talk about this a few hundred years ago, in a world that was not so equipped with the technology. But civilization is not just technology. That's my
No, for sure. But if you talk about spirituality, and I totally agree. But the thing about the tap water, the practical thing is that decides where you can be spiritual. Because after the tap water goes, you can no longer be spiritual in the city center. You have to go up in the mountains to be spiritual, even. so, so that's my point.
I'd
Yeah.
like to, um, yeah, I was going to use the same metaphor about the fish in the water. Civilization, for a lot of us, well, for all of us, that's all we've known. So unless we really stop to question why are things spiraling worse and worse, we're gonna not, it's what we know. And also to Sophie's point about the machine, I'm just thinking that somehow it kind of relates to this trend or desire of the globalists to have centralized control of everything, and including um, introducing like digital currencies or social credit systems. So I'm just thinking that it is such a big effort, and it's very full of pride and hubris for them to think that they can control everything. It's like the meta alien cortex. So a part of me believes that they will fail, and that I see as part of our resistance is to resist that centralization as much as possible by concentrating on the local. And as Lord Hugh and Mike repeated to us a couple of meetings ago, it's the removal of intermediaries, that as much as we can, we deal directly with our needs, which is like Bob said, it's almost impossible in city life, but still you can do little things. Provide part of your food from local suppliers, local gardens, get to know your farmers. But yeah, so to me, resistance is resisting the centralized aims of the elite. So when Sophie talks of the machine, that's what I think of, because it's almost like they're so proud and they cannot see that they cannot control everything, and that things are running away from their control. If we notice that leaders don't seem to think too much or think ahead, maybe that's what it is. Like they can't really control it anymore because it's like a big snowball that is rolling down the mountain already.
Well, maybe there's some that are like, uh, you know, have good intentions, but it just seems to me like the Draculas that control the financial system, the guys that really run this show, are probably going to try to ensure the system collapses from the bottom up. So all the poorest people die first, and then it steadily makes its way up to the rich nations. I kind of have a sneaking suspicion that's kind of the plan for their managed extinction, but I don't know. I just, have nightmares about this stuff.
I
Yeah,
wonder, I
we're
guess,
dispensable.
yeah, I mean, what I'm just thinking while you were talking there is, you know, uh, you've got this tension between the digital globalization and AI and transhumanism and all this very rarefied, high tech controlled thing that's going on. And I kind of wonder whether the degree and intensity with which that is being clung to is a measure of just um, how close fragmentation and collapse of society is. In other words, that they're getting extremely desperate and they're holding on even tighter because if you look at the way things are going now, with impending economic collapse, loss of food security, environmental, you know, weather destructions, and all the rest of it, it looks like things are falling apart quicker than these people are going to be able to hold them together for their own purposes. So there's that point. I want just to go back to what Torstein said about Oslo's days, of clean water supplies. It's only going to survive for a day or so if it's not managed. Because there's been some things recently. You've probably seen, YouTube videos. Oh, there's only 50 days food supply left in the world. We're all screwed and all the rest of it. And very likely there's a lot of truth in that. But I can remember several years ago reading about there is a website. Um,
All right.
yeah, just continue. There is a website that monitors the global food supply. And when I was looking at that a couple of years ago, uh, it seems that even in so-called normal times, uh, this before pandemic, before this war in Europe and all the rest of it, that there's about 90 days of food supply normally. What they call 90 days food supply uh, averaged out, I guess, over the entire planet. I don't quite know how they calculate it, but they come up with this figure. And so I remember at the time thinking how alarming that figure was, that it was such a short period of time. And of course, now they're talking about like somewhere around about 50 days supply now that we've subtracted Russia and the Ukraine and created problems for fertilizers and agriculture in Western countries as well. But the point is, I think people should have been alarmed years ago at how fragile the food supply was, normal, even in so-called normal times. Um, uh, yeah, I did
What
have something else to say. Oh, go on. Yeah, I'll let you talk because I haven't got half an idea how to
what
so
you're
I'll be quiet.
saying is reminding me of Earth Overshoot Day, is when you go through all of our civilization supplies and start drawing down the planet.
Yeah, we've probably
And
already got there for this year, haven't
oh
we?
no, not yet. That's when
Not yet.
the synchronicity comes in. I looked it up. Earth Overshoot Day is on my birthday this year.
So you've got a birthday coming very soon, have you?
July 31st. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I got
Yep.
July too. Yeah. Um, but yeah. Actually, I was trying to hatch something intelligent to say about. Yeah, that's what it was. Uh, Back when Torstein and A were talking about the analogy of the fish in a tank of water, but I think the thing was civilization. I'm wondering whether it goes even deeper than that. That this comes into the realm of Sheldon Solomon and his terror management theory. Well, it wasn't his theory. Whose theory was it? But anyway, he spoke about terror management theory and this inability to be able to process the prospect of dying. And so, we enter into all these denial strategies. And uh, I'm wondering whether that's what's happening here, because as I said earlier, in the conversations that Hugh had with Faulty and Blondie, how they both absolutely understood that we were completely screwed and the situation was not redeemable. Um, and that we've got this situation where civilization is we can't afford to let go of the idea of somehow saving civilization, because subconsciously we understand that without it, most human beings are going to have to die, because there's just going to be no way to maintain them without the kind of high energy fossil fuel powered agriculture, you know, food exchange system globally and all the rest of it. So it's kind of like, is the fact that uh, activism and and even the thought of fairly significant thinkers stops at a certain point and dares not go any further because of this death terror, because you can talk about the end of civilization or civilizational collapse, but it implies as unavoidably the death of most of the human race or human beings on the planet, I guess.
Yeah,
So I'm wondering if there's a kind of a cringe, that there's a withdrawal from that because it's too much.
yeah, you really can't fucking talk about this subject at all, because there's like a small child with some disability that relies on Western medicine. And, when you bring up this topic, the
It's going to die. Yeah.
even the suggestion is, you want little Billy to die, or whatever, even if you're just trying to analyze the situation. So if you're not even advocating for an end of civilization, but you're just going, well, this appears to be the inevitable outcome over the next few years. And I think what's interesting about this whole current war, whatever the hell it is, scenario, is that it's accelerated, or it's bringing us closer into view of like a really fucking serious crisis, in the sense that, again, me being detached from the realities of everyday existence, but and just learning about this thing of like, there's the fertilizer has become so expensive that, again, on this island, farmers will be thinking twice about how much of the stuff they're using, but we won't find out about the consequences for another year or so. But it looks like a possibility that the amount of stuff that grows in fields might be reduced by 50%, or that the price will be double, or whatever. And then suddenly you've got this thing where a bunch of knock-on effects happen. There's already talk of like starvation and stuff around the world. The British government is considering the possibility of having to do load shedding, which means rationing electricity, even in this coming winter. And so a bunch of events that would, and these are things that maybe if you were living in some third world country, you're going, yeah, whatever, tell me something I don't know about, and it'd be quite normal. And I've lived in circumstances where that was a kind of normal thing, that supplies of certain commodities were limited, and you'd have to just get used to the idea that on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday you only get two hours of electricity, and in itself that's not that bad. But what it reflects is our rich societies that don't have to put up with that sort of thing are suddenly like teetering on the brink. And so we're looking at this stuff that, even I think among people like ourselves, we're going, oh yes, civilization is collapsing, the environment's gone to shit, the economy is going to collapse. But it's now sort of happening in a much more dramatic and imminent feeling way, so that I can very easily imagine this time next year not being able to take for granted getting any type of food, or not being able to take for granted that I can use the internet all hours of the day, and so on. And I think that for someone like Faulty to tell the truth, if he sees things through a similar lens that we do, is that he would be confronted with the impossibility of having to basically own up to the fact that, yeah, millions of people are going to not survive, just because a disruption to, again, the provision of various medicines. People get I mean, when you think about things like, I don't know, certain antidepressants, where once the doctor puts you on that medication, they don't tell you this, but once they put you on it, it's very, very hard to get off. Even these, again, I don't know anything much about this, but as far as I know, all this antidepressants that the doctor makes you pop as soon as you turn up and say you're feeling a little bit miserable, but there are these things that they give you that are really, really hard to get off. And so if you have a disruption in the supply of certain pills that people have been given, there are people who will go into like an immediate crisis as soon as the Prozac runs out. If you've been on Prozac for even a couple of months, it can be incredibly, like the consequences of withdrawing can be horrific. And you think something like that might happen sooner than later, and you end up with like people who just can't fucking deal with things. Is that?
I don't think it will be a catastrophe with the people who, if the Prozac disappears, because if the Prozac disappears, that means that a lot of the causes of the depression of those people, the reason why they're going to see the doctor, is suddenly going to disappear, because suddenly they're going to have to fend for themselves, and they're going to have to find water and food, and suddenly
like physical withdrawals.
yeah, but they're not. Yeah, but of
exist.
course. But think the worst is the people who use drugs, illegal drugs, or people who drink a lot, alcohol, or alcoholics, or people who are addicts of all sorts of kind. That would be a very difficult crowd to deal with. That would be
the
much
ganja allotment project would be a great collapse scenario.
Yeah.
To think about.
But I think that what you said earlier is, you said there's going to be probably, I mean, we don't know how many people are going to die, because it's impossible to talk about that sort of forecast in the collapse of civilization, whether it's going to be sudden, gradual, whatever. But yes, if civilization disappears, the numbers are going to be high. They're already high in Africa and a lot of countries. People are already suffering from civilizations and dying by the thousands. But, what choice do we have? We're going to have to face an enormous. Hugh was talking a lot about that. Are you ready to die for something bigger than yourself? Are you ready to pledge your alliance to nature and to the wild world instead of to the system? You see, it's an enormous question. What's going to happen with our scenario? It's not the scenario that we want, but it's just the scenario that is going to happen in the spirit of flippening. It is going to be massive, and we're not talking about what's going to happen. Oh my God, how can we? It is written. It is going to happen if civilization disappears. This is going to happen. We have to prepare ourselves to survive and help people around us survive or die. But at least, we need to let go of this addiction to civilization, and it is a very difficult. I know all about addiction. I mean, cigarettes were my and I know exactly what it is when you go off these sort of things. So I haven't had any other addictions, but I imagine that what you're talking about, the Prozac people, those are the ones that might be in the best situation. The diabetics will be in a worse situation, or certain people like Derek Jensen, who is saying that he depends on drugs. If things collapse, he's gone.
Those were the kinds of people I was talking about, like where somebody has become dependent physically on some medication or other. And I mean, the diabetes example, I think when Brexit was happening, that was something that the more doomily inclined in relation to that particular episode were saying, oh yeah, we might run out of insulin or something. So obviously people who need insulin would be pretty fucked immediately, I would assume. So those sort of things, but I think that's coming back to what Gary was saying about the reticence to go as far as talking about collapse and recognizing the consequence of that is pretty scary, I think, and that's why people like Faulty and so on don't really talk about those things. The same reason, I've got a sort of comedy turn that I do, which is my sort of mask. So I do openly make jokes and stuff about the collapse of everything in front of normies, but then haha, it's a kind of stand-up routine, and so that allows them to kind of brush it off and pretend that I'm just a bit of a wag.
The conversation of facing death, I came across a really good insight. I mean, like, even though the goal of like spiritual development to an extent is to escape duality, civilization itself is dualistic, so we're still trapped in its duality. But this insight I came across listening to this lecture on a piece of media was I thought it was a deep insight. So in the face of death, they said that there's like these two reactions. One is to avoid death at all costs and preserve their way of existence, and that comes at even if that comes at the death of all possibilities. So imagination, transformation, any kind of change, the death of all life on a planet. And then the other pole of that is people who are willing to face their own demise and step into the unknown, and that is the way of infinite possibility.
For someone like me who's been following the ecology scene, or who has been an ecologist since about 1985 in my teens, it's kind of strange to increasingly become aware of a split, in particular in the later years, between those ecologists who want to save nature and the earth, and those who only want to save our way of living. They want to save civilization, and I'm kind of like, when I see the latter group acting or writing and discussing, I kind of don't really believe them. But then I look closer at them, and they actually are fighting tooth and nail to make industrial civilization prevail. And for that discussion, I made a figure or a tree graph. Is it okay if I show that? If I try to show it? I never shared anything on here, so this is experimental.
Yeah, try it
Oh,
again, because I didn't have a chance to
yeah,
look at it the first time you put it
yeah.
up. Yeah,
And
yeah,
I'm gonna speak over it, so it won't be only the graph.
yeah, yeah.
So just tell me if this works, okay? Can you see this now? Can you see a tree?
That's good. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can see it. I
Great,
don't know if
great.
Yeah,
it's.
yeah, I
Yeah.
can see it.
Yeah. So I'll do it quick. So this is basically on the left here. You have sort of the civilization and the human perspective, and on the right side here you have how it looks from all other living beings on the planet. Yeah. So I'll basically just go through it left to right. So what the latter group, the group that wants to save civilization, the ecology groups that want to save civilization, they are afraid that organized society will end. And the entire graph here is sort of at or post collapse, right? So the organized society, that means cities and towns and communities of humans, they will end. But on the other side, for plants and animals, life goes on, because life is much more sort of diverse and can live in many more places. Like, for instance, the birds can just fly to another place, right? And also we can't go around the fact of the mass human die-off, because the only reason we have so many people now, like 8 billion, is because we figured out clever ways to get more energy and food out of Earth by disregarding every other species or interest on the planet. But that, the end of the organized society and the mass die-off of our species will lead to improved living conditions for every other form of life on Earth and ecosystems. So on the human side, this grinding halt leads to less toxicity and less plastics. So the steady stream of toxicity and plastics into our nature and waterways and the oceans will cease. And that's sort of the most important way to make an improvement in the world, is to make sure that something bad doesn't continue eternally, right? So on the flip side, on the nature side, that leads to a cleaner planet pretty soon, pretty fast. After we stop pouring out our stuff, it will be cleaner air, cleaner water, very, very fast for the nature side, and also for the surviving, no longer civilized humans trying to eke out an existence. So yeah, and of course the human expansion ends. We will no longer expand cities and expand, communities, industrial areas, domestic living areas. So that means that nature is able to retake cities and to encroach on our on our traditional areas. And of course, the more space nature and plants and animals have, like in post nuclear disaster Chernobyl, the better nature fares, because it's more space to thrive on. And the two final points is the heat, the increased heat with global warming. It stops agriculture through heat itself and through floods and droughts. But of course, life itself is much more resilient, because life is like 1 billion species that are not humans and not cats and dogs. And an example of life being more resilient is the very tree that you see in the background of all this text, because this is they say it's a pine or a fir. To me, it looks like a spruce, like you see in the Norwegian mountains. But whatever the species, the thing is that many city people don't know that you can have wildfires every 10 or 20 years, and these trees will still be standing. In fact, if you when you study old trees, old growth trees like 50 or 100 or many hundred years old, you find that they have traces of wildfires in their wood and stuff for many wildfires that have been throughout their life. And I think with the very first wildfire in the Oslo area, I experienced, I learned a lot about how this is only a catastrophe for the guy who owns the forest, who is going to sell it to lumber and stuff. But for the forest and for the species and insects and everything living in the forest, this is just business as usual. And a wildfire will very soon attract insects that can actually smell it from thousands of miles away and come there, and also lots of plants colonize the fire area, and as I said, these majestic, beautiful pines or spruce trees, they just live on because a wildfire is nothing to them. Basically, it has to get very, very hot for these trees to die in a wildfire. They're actually the entire taiga from Canada to Siberia of this kinds of snow forest trees. They are adapted to repeated wildfires. So that's part of their evolutionary history. So basically, nature can deal with this, and agriculture-based human civilization cannot. And I think there is too much emphasis on how bad things are going to be for humans. In fact, I just checked the so-called 9 planetary boundaries from the Stockholm Resilience Center, and the fact that the whole concept of these planetary boundaries is an anthropocentric, a human-centric thing. So all of these 9 different sort of aspects that are getting worse are only about keeping human habitation or organized human habitation. And the fact is that when there is a collapse of the functional human societies, 8 of these 9 planetary boundaries start immediately improving and become better for the ones who are still alive, for the different species. And the last one, the 9th one, is climate change, global warming, whatever. And that one planetary boundary is the one that caused human society to collapse. But that can easily be seen, spiritually. It can easily be seen as nature defending itself by kicking out the bully in the corner. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's very interesting. But it's again the same thing. It's if the anthropocentric view of civilization, this human civilization, is blocking the view for all the environmental people we've talked about. Is this anthropocentric view constantly at work everywhere, and with the people you talk to, which is why I usually don't interact with too many people, because it's just it's exacting.
Yeah, I totally feel that. Like, in America, like, I sometimes say to people, I'm like, yeah, it'd be great if America collapsed, because then all the deer, elk, wolves, bears, salmon, etc. can take their country back that they've had for millions of years. Because the colonists basically, colonists did wipe wolves out in the most cruel ways you can imagine. They reintroduced them in Yellowstone, but yeah, the colonists are brutal. They just went through like a freaking stormtroopers and just killed everything.
That sort of reminds me of that talk that I posted with Schmachtenberger, that I find fascinating, because I don't know what he sounds like, someone who really is very smart, knows what he's talking about. But my brain always does this flip thing where I listen intently to him speaking for a bit, thinking, "Oh, here's a clever bloke," and then something happens. And I think, "Oh no, this is just a guy farting nonsense." And I'm not sure. I don't know. I can't really judge. But anyway, there was this thing I posted on the Reddit, and he talks with this bloke, Nate Hagens, or whatever, and they talk about the inevitability of the human beings, becoming what we have become, and that they're always, there's this like, it sounded kind of hopeless in a way, that the way our brain works, or whatever, I suppose what you call the ego or alien cortex, is always going to lead to something like this. So hopefully, if a procedure like going south just described occurs, that maybe the human mindset will also change, so that the whole phenomenon doesn't happen again. Maybe that's what the story of Atlantis and those sort of things is about.
Yeah, I watched that video with that guy on the sub. I think almost everything he says in the analysis is correct. There's only a couple things I disagree with. One is where he said there's like a middle ground between like Mumford and the other guy, the other analysis of technology, where one says it's neutral and Mumford says no. Technology has its built-in values and it leads to this no matter what. And he said, no, that's not quite right either. It's sort of like this. And no, Mumford's right. I'm sorry. Mumford is 100% right on that point. And then at the end, I wrote the comment. I couldn't help it. I wrote a comment on that video where I talked about how I snorted coffee through my nose laughing at the end, because he basically said at the end that like the change will result into something that's totally different. I'm like, yeah, no shit. It's called hunting and gathering if we survive this disaster. It's interesting that sometimes those smart people like don't realize exactly what they're saying with shit like that, saying like, oh, the energy flows and all this stuff we're gonna have is different. It's like, yeah, the opposite of civilization is wilderness.
Yeah. Well, you see, Bob, about Joe, about about that conversation with Daniel S. I we were going to have a meeting with George today, and it was cancelled, and because he was talking about this, kind of, is it written that humans are going to go extinct? Like, is it just unavoidable? I went back to visit episode 22 video with Lord Hugh. The title was "Is Human Extinction Predestined?" So I remember in that video that he's warning against this type of people, saying, well, that is the people that are clever and the people that are wise. It's all so simple. If humans were wise, he said, he takes the example of the nuclear bomb. Humans were clever enough to build a nuclear bomb, but if they were wise, they wouldn't have done it. And that guy in the video, he's extremely intelligent. He's just really he's just likes to talk, and he can talk well, and he knows a lot of things, but it's only cleverness. There is no wisdom in that conversation, and there's absolutely, actually, the dimension. I think that there's also a spiritual dimension that's completely missing in it, but there is certainly no wisdom. It's the cleverness. That's it. You should go back to episode 22. We're going to, I'll contact George again to get the meeting going with him again, and we'll be able to talk about this subject again with him, I hope.
Yeah, I was thinking about George's some of his things. Just from what we've been saying in the last few minutes. I don't know whether it's a kind of a totally worn out or inappropriate thing to say, but a lot of the discussions center around this remark of how the discourse is very human-centered, and what Torstein was saying about the planetary boundaries being mainly associated with things that are relevant to the survival of human beings rather than the general ecosystem. Just some observations. Are we really unnatural? In other words, even this complex technical civilization and all the rest of it, which appears to be divorced from nature, but is there a sense in which it's still part of nature? We still grow out of it. We're still an extension of it one way or another, even when we're hanging right out there with AI and silicon chips and all the rest of it. It's still part of the continuum. And so even though this seems to be very perverse, what's going on the planet at the moment, could it still be considered just an extension of the natural process of life on this planet? And so what is occurring at the moment is a kind of inevitable outcome of that. And just another point about the anthropocentric accusation. is that the only discourse that can occur is the anthropocentric discourse, because we're the only ones who 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 are kind of talking, at least talking in a literal way. I mean, I suppose you could definitely say that nature is communicating all the time, but it's not the kind of literal discursive thing that human beings engage in, the exchange of ideas and all the rest of it. Um, and this brings me back because Sophie's just mentioned George. And one of the things that I noticed George said a few times in some of the discussions that he had had with other people was he seemed to be a little bit down on human beings because he said, we're the only organism or the only animal. I can't remember the exact words he used, but something. We're the only ones that don't have a purpose. We don't have a reason for being here. We don't fulfill an ecological niche or have any, we're not like bees that pollinate and mosquitoes that transfer viruses here and there. Most viruses are useful things, not necessarily damaging things like some of the ones we're experiencing at the moment. And it was as though, uh, we were some kind of terrible biological aberration because we're an apex. He said we're an apex predator without any predator for us. So we've run amok and all this kind of thing. And he kind of reminded me of something that Hugh said, probably only a couple of times. He didn't make a big point of it. Was that um, that if we go extinct, then there's a good chance that conscious awareness might never arise again. That it was a one-off occurrence, and um, this is the one thing which I think is our purpose. Is what is the crowning glory of human beings, if it isn't politically incorrect to claim any kind of glory for them at this stage, but is the fact that we've got this self-reflective consciousness, which apparently nothing else has, and we can reflect on other things and reflect upon ourselves and reflect upon our own consciousness. Um, and in its highest form, of course, that leads to our spiritual awakening. And of course, most human beings haven't got anywhere near that. But this is a great loss. Uh, um, I'm just trying to. Sorry, just because I'm tired, I'm having trouble directing this to where I want to get to. But yeah, I guess my thing is I'm aware that it sounds like a defense of human beings at the very time when they appear to be indefensible because of the destruction that they're wreaking. But I think we have to acknowledge that there is something special about them. That would be a great tragedy if it was lost, and we can't. I just my inner feeling when people sort of trash the human beings as a totality, as because of the damage they're doing. Um, I don't want to subscribe to that 100%. But something very, very important has gone on as part of the process of our coming to be here. And losing that entirely seems to be a great tragedy. It's as much of a tragedy as losing the sort of supposedly separate natural world. Um, uh, you know, and I guess what I'm trying to do, I don't know whether it's just my own personal thing. it's a case of my projecting my desire to preserve myself personally onto a desire to wanting to keep the at least some of the human species going because of the higher things that they are capable of. I don't know if anyone else
Sure,
has got a comment.
sure. I think humans are still part of nature and will always be part of nature. And you have to remember that for 99.9% of humans' time on the planet, they were not civilized. I mean, we're not doing these kinds of atrocities that they're doing now. And I also think that the best metaphor or allegory I've heard for civilized humans is for a swarm of locusts, yeah, or grasshoppers or whatever you call it. So if you have one locust, it can sort of go away its merry way and eat some farm produce or whatever they do when they're not swarming. But when they go into the swarming stage, they fly here and eat everything there, and they fly over to this farm and eat everything there. So civilized humans are kind of like a perpetual locust swarm, just devouring everything in our way. Um, but I also agree with you about humans being special and different and stuff, also in a positive way. But we have to remember that 99% of our speciality or being different has proven through the centuries to be wrong. Because philosophers and other people have said, yeah, but we are the only ones who can hear or see or speak or walk, or people have had all kinds of ideas about how special humans are, and then other humans are kind of, it seems that the plants can do that as well. Yeah, it seems the fox can do it. Yeah, the bear does it. The pigeons in the street do it. Okay, so they also feel pity for a friend who's been run over by a car. Okay, yeah, yeah. So basically, everything that humans say that we are special about, we are not. It just takes like a month or a year, and somebody finds it out. It seems everybody can do that. But I like the idea. I'm the first person to defend science and art and all the great Dichter und Denker, which is a German concept. The big cultural heights that humans have been to. Maybe we peaked like 200 years ago. I think that's an interesting question. When humans peaked and just retarded, started retarding. I'll just shut up now.
Yeah, what I was referring to regarding human beings wasn't so much those things that we have in common with other living beings. It was this idea, specifically this idea of self-reflective awareness. In other words, we're not just conscious, but we know that we are, and we can reflect upon that. And in the case of which animals and other things do not appear to be able to do. They may have awareness, and yeah, but I'm talking about their. It's not just consciousness; it's consciousness of consciousness, which takes it to another level. Is what I'm talking about. And if that's not enough, in the case of people who, the thing that Hugh has spoken about of getting past the alien cortex, and the alien cortex is at the level of consciousness of consciousness, and even he was saying we've got to get past that as well. The meditative state, and Bob and I have had some discussions about that. It goes another level even beyond that, which is beyond the mind. In other words, it's like a consciousness of consciousness of consciousness, which if you try to think about that, you'll find you cannot do it. And so the mind falls silent. And that is what I'm referring to, because it seems that humans are unique in being able to reflect upon their reflection. And that this has led to our, I guess it's led to us, well, very much being God, because like in the traditional uh, Eastern thing, and I think in a lot of genuine spiritual traditions, it's this idea that God created the universe or created the world for, if you want to put it in biblical terms, like for his pleasure or whatever, um, uh, because you have to produce something that can reflect upon what's there in order to know that it's there. In other words, in order to experience existence, God had to bring the universe and the world into existence. I'm sorry, I'm explaining this rather badly, but uh, and I think that's the role that our consciousness is supposed to be fulfilling. Is that uh, the culmination of the planet and the ecology and the animals and everything exists, the crowning glory of that. And I don't mean crowning glory in some kind of sense that it's superior or that it lords it over everything, but our consciousness is the kind of capstone of that, uh, because that is the thing that can look out over this creation and appreciate it in its totality for what it is, in a very conscious and aware way, not just living in it and being aware of the part where you're living in, but actually being able to have a comprehension and apprehension of it. And I think that's what sets human beings apart. And the great tragedy in losing human beings is that it's kind of like putting on an amazing performance at a large theatre or venue, and not having an audience there. Is it's all just being done, and then the people on the stage retire, and nobody ever saw it. It's such to say that human beings are like the witness of and appreciators of this glorious creation. We're sort of, I'm sorry, I can't explain it more clearly.
That's very clear, Gary. Thank you. That no, for the time it is for you. Thank you. You started this on the premise of George saying that humans have no role. He says, as no. He said have no ecological role, which is even kind of more narrow. Actually, he doesn't give it the dimension that you're giving. But could that be what you're describing? Our role in this world to
Yeah,
to
that's what I mean. That there is a role, but it's not a strictly ecological role that I think George had in mind. I felt that he needed to expand his
mhm.
idea of what might constitute a role and a significance or a meaning in our existence. Because even if you want to just look at it from a a point that I can't defend, but the comment is, nature doesn't is not primarily in the business of creating useless things. I mean, the fact that we're here.
But we're there to witness and shut up, basically, and admire and be. But we're not. You know
Yeah,
what
but
I
I
mean?
mean that's it, and our awe and amazement at existence and our absolute uh, enthrallment with it is, I think that's our function, and it is the function of being God's sensory apparatus in the world. If you want to put it that way, I mean, I'm not using
Look
it
at
as
the
God as.
comments. Look, can you read the comments, Gary? There, because
Oh,
it's
okay. Sorry,
funny.
I haven't.
No, but it's funny because the last ones are. Is there a difference between our witnessing and a mouse or a bee? My role is to be here and say, "I told you so." We are the eyes of God. I mean, these are all very interesting comments because it's opening a new direction in this conversation. Because
Yeah, I
uh,
can't see
yeah,
it, unfortunately. It's not
if you go
on
into
my. Here we
comment, if you're
go.
not on there,
Okay.
if you go into
Well,
comment,
I suppose the question
Yeah,
is
yeah.
the difference between you or me witnessing something and a border collie witnessing something. I mean, why do we need to witness it?
Yeah. Well, um, yeah. Well, that's my point. Is that the dog is witnessing it, or the bee, or whatever, but it it's simply aware of what's happening. Um, but I'm saying that we are aware that we are aware of what's happening. And if we become spiritually awakened, we've even gone beyond that, that we have become aware that we are aware that we're aware of it. And so,
How do we know that though? How like is a bee not aware of being aware? Maybe a bee is aware of being aware.
well,
Well, one of the things I came across a long while ago, I can't remember the video or lecture, but they were talking about how like wild animals live their archetypes, and human beings can become aware of the archetypes and talk about them. That's something I think is probably a different.
yeah, I think that's getting towards what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Isn't it? But how do? But there's no way for us to know what the subjective experience of other beings is, even
No, yeah, I
subjective
agree,
experience of
but
neighbours
you're
is.
quite right. We just have to. I know there's never going to probably be a
Well,
conclusive
well,
way to.
I mean, there's no way I could know like what it's like to be in a lion's sort of culture and ethos, so to speak. But even Hugh talked about we have the same mammalian wiring, so we can empathize with like animals and lizards and stuff because we have those same parts of our brains.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I suppose it would be reasonable to assume that a lion can have a spiritual experience or be aware of his or her awareness as well as we can. Then, if we sort of think about that, yeah, I
Um,
think it's sort of the same sort of machinery or whatever it is.
No, they have.
yeah,
I think they're wired up to the mammalian brain, and then humans have the primate, and then the alien cortex. So, because we have the alien cortex, we can do things that a lion cannot do.
the other
But
thing
that's
is,
that. Yeah, but that's not to say that because we have an alien cortex and we can craft tools or write shit down, that means it's superior. I don't think it is, but it is unique. It is sort of you know, the our species thing. Like lions, they're strong. They hunt. They're good at bringing down prey. They have their social bonds, and then humans, we sort of have this meta layer of consciousness where we can see our archetypes and talk about stuff and then express stuff through art and all that.
yeah, which
see,
is
I
why
think,
it is the problem of the alien cortex could be rediscussed again, maybe in a further meeting.
yeah, we
Because then
might have.
we're coming to the heart of the beast. We're coming
Yeah,
to the heart of the beast of that part of our brain that has made us all run amok and destroy everything around us, and that is talking now in this conversation, that is running through us, even though we know that we have to master it, and we know that we have to to make me smash it, to just bend it under our control. It's still talking to us. So we're in a kind of a. Actually, it was Hugh that was often saying that these meetings are actually alien cortex based. You know?
Yeah, it's the digital. So, like if we remember, most people are right-handed. Alien cortex is the left hemisphere wired to the right hand. And basically, its whole thing was to extend the reach of your right hand. So think of technology. Now it's like we got civilization. So it's since the alien cortex projected its fucking blocks all over the planet, and now our collective right hand is squeezing the earth like a freaking stress ball because we don't want to die. But it's like the trick is to take that sort of even Hugh talked about this. Take that sort of pathology it has to put things in boxes and put itself in a box. And maybe that's how you create the quantum observer, where it just sits there and doesn't interfere with all the natural processes in the body and in nature, and just goes along with the stream of life.
Yes, you see, we are, everything is unique. A bee is unique, a lion is unique. I mean, humans are unique too. And what is making our uniqueness is what we've been talking about. It doesn't make us superior, better, but losing human beings mean that we're using our uniqueness, whatever nature it is. And anything that disappears in this world, any species that disappears, whether it's plant, animal, insect, or whatever, is a tragedy. The disappearance of human beings it would be a tragedy because of our uniqueness. It can be
Yeah, but
discussed at extent.
aren't we uniquely causing many other species to disappear? And in that case, maybe
Yeah,
our disappearance at least would take less uniqueness out of the picture.
yeah, I know that, but that might be part of our uniqueness. It's black and white. I'm not saying that it's a beautiful uniqueness, but there is uniqueness. There's some uniqueness in the organism that caused the plague, and it may, it's just that the tragedy is the imbalance and the dominance of the what we call the alien cortex in the human beings, and then we come back to this. We come back to when we evolved from our primate brain to our sapiens or Homo sapiens brain, and whenever this part of the left cortex started to operate for us, when it started to dominate and lead us to be destructive around us, is that's where the problem resides, and that's what I'd like to discuss with George when he's in with us, because he really deeply thinks that we are just we're just an error, that we shouldn't be here, and that makes very little of nature, because nature wouldn't do that. Nature doesn't. Oh my God! Oh God, that's very bad. I'm sorry, but I've just looked at the. Oh,
Yeah, I mean, I would want to encourage George to read, Freddie Perlman's book, Against History, Against Leviathan, because he has this multi-layered approach, and he even, like, this book was written in the 80s, and the guy basically identified the alien cortex. He basically called it, like, the spirit that runs civilization, like a war machine. Called it Lugal, Gazizi, Optimus, Maximus, all those sorts of things, and then
yeah,
said that he even said in the book that civilization is a web of humanly meaningless constraints, meaning that it is inhuman, that we have put basically our humanity on the altar and sacrificed it to this machine. And so this is not humanity. Civilization is not humanity. It is, it's something else. It's a machine. Yeah. Yeah, so I agree with Freddie Perlman, because, like, think about it. No other animal on this planet works willingly to cause its own health to fail like this. Like, lions don't try to cage themselves up and wither away. Yeah, like, you know, even Hugh talked about a lot, like, our brains are shrinking, like the human animal parts of our brains, the neurons are shrinking because of domestication. So it's like this civilization is not human, it is an inhuman malaise. Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's wonderful stuff. Thanks for that. I just, I guess thinking about George's comments and it kind of tends to lead to this point where I have to ask the question. I don't think is there any going to be any benefit in us being ashamed of ourselves? Because it's
No.
where
Um,
and I think that's what on the one hand we don't want to be engaging in hubris about how fucking wonderful we are, but to be absolutely self-flagellating about how miserable the results are that we've created, at least physically in the world, um, and engage in it because we seem to have this polarity between, this very anthropocentric view of things and what's going to keep humans alive and what's good for humans. And then there's no middle ground. And then suddenly there's the other extreme was just how shameful and rotten we are because of what we've done and how completely worthless and damaging or worse, we're either worthless or we're positively outright a curse to the planet. Um, which, I don't think is very resourceful either. Um, uh,
Was this the sort of free will thing? You know, the non-dual awakening thing says that we have no agent.
Recording is on.
Yeah, you
Go
can
on,
only
Bob.
be
Do you want to just?
anthropic if you recognise that we have no agency, isn't it? Well, you can only be misanthropic rather that if you recognise that, or if you think. So let me start again. If you think that we have agency, then we can be a misanthrope. But if you recognise that we probably don't have agency and there's probably no such thing as free will, then you can only hate human beings so much, can't you? Because there's not
Yeah,
really.
but you see, they're both symptoms of being insufficiently aware. It is that we neither have agency nor we don't have it. In a situation where you actually are aware of and know that you are not different from the rest of creation, you don't need free will or agency because what you will and what you want to do is exactly the same as what everything else is already doing anyway. And so your will is in alignment with everything else. It's not we tend to use the word will as imposition on other things that we wish to influence the course of events for those things. But if you're sort of in the flow of existence and not standing on the bank of it, the way the water's going is the way you're going as well. So you don't, in a sense, will is it. It's sort of a way of looking at it is becomes superfluous. Um, you, you you only need that if you're separate, and this is where I think we have to address this next step of human evolution, which is what we're on the cusp of at the moment. Is are we going to become the next level of awareness where we understand our intimate connection with her, not just understand it, but actually be it be in this intimate connection with everything, or are we going to continue to construct things called civilization, which are basically a separate living entity that then dictates back to us and the world, and nobody really has control over that. It's got its own agenda. I mean, it's more that the creations that we make are the things that are running amok, rather than the actual human beings themselves. We set up a system called civilization, and not even the human beings can control it. It's the Moloch that's now taken on an independent life. So you know, um, that's not the creation we want to be feeding. Uh, our next big creation needs to be our shift to consciousness, not our shift to even more intense forms of civilization. Sorry, I suppose I sound as I'm thumping a
No, no,
pulpit here.
I think that's great. But you see, I think that the trap of self-loathing and human bashing is the same. It's coming from the exact same
It's the
place.
alien cortex.
Uh,
Yeah, same place.
yeah,
That's right.
as what we're doing to the world around us. So that's why I cannot subscribe at all to this sort of. I really like the fact of our uniqueness, and I think that's something I strongly feel, as I feel every flower in my meadow is unique in its species, and everyone has a role to play. The big mystery of the human beings is still to come, probably around the corner, as you said, Gary. We still haven't got there, and we're far away from there. But I would not subscribe to this. We're just a parasite. Let's get rid of all humans, and everything will be fine. This sort of discourse is at the root of a lot of collapsed people at the moment. It's a shortcut. It's an intellectual shortcut and an emotional shortcut, but it's also a dead end, and I don't like it. I don't like it for not for me, because I've got my own views, but I don't like it for the people going down that road, because it's a suicidal type of reasoning.
Yeah,
When you know.
yeah, so I left a comment on the last meeting to sort of emphasize where I was going last time, but it's also from Freddie Perlman's book. He goes over three stances um, on this. One is basically apathy, like who gives a shit, and then the other is the guilt path, being ashamed, wishing we were something else. And then he suggests the third path, which is the trapped animal, because we're trapped in a cage, right? And so you don't feel guilt, but it's like you can still wild yourself to an extent in your cage, and I think that's a worthwhile thing to do instead of sort of whipping yourself for all of history, which um, I mean, you have to feel, the sadness of where we are, of course. Like you can't be detached from that. Like it's inevitable. I feel like anybody who's gotten here, like Derek Jensen and stuff, you've probably cried a river of.
We've lost you, DB.
DB, we can't hear you.
Yeah, it says a connection lost.
Oh, okay, right. I just maybe we should finish up soon. It was just had a thought regarding what I think it was Bob might have said about how to, and probably Torstein too, remarking about how like how do we know the consciousness of animals or insects or anything like that. And I suppose in a very scientific way, we probably never can be sure and prove this conclusively, what the nature of the consciousness of animals or insects or other living things might be. But I think there's a sense in which we can intuit that, and that we're fairly sensitive to it. And uh, if you want to think of it like just these people here now on this meeting are all here because without intimately knowing a person called Lord Hugh, well, they all became very strongly convinced of a certain um, kind of consciousness that he had and the importance of it. And there's no way that we could ever prove that or demonstrate it or sell it to somebody else who was skeptical on the basis of some rational argument, or we just could, but we just know it. No, no, have this insight into the consciousness of another being, and I think that's what we have to rely on when we're thinking about animals' consciousness and the kind of levels of consciousness that human beings are capable of. Is that I think if a person's being very genuine, um, that you have to accept that the view that we're capable of greater depth of and levels of consciousness than animals are. It's just something we've got to accept as true, and proceed from there. I mean, there's times when in a lot of discussions where you come to that point where everybody's getting rather exasperated, and you say, "Look, I can't prove it, but we just have to take this as self-evidently true." And uh, otherwise, you can't sort of continue the discourse. Um, you've just got to sort of accept that some things are never going to be able to be adequately demonstrated, uh, uh, and uh, and just um, accept, the assertion that's being made. So yeah, just that's just that point I wanted to tack on there. Should we wind this up now? I think we've been going for a long time. It's the
Sure.
feeling.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
well, there is one more thing I could probably say that's good. A couple months back, I saw it really like sometimes I get thrown these random YouTube videos and I watch them. So there's this couple in this boat and they were filming on their phone, and there's this eagle, this juvenile eagle, probably born that year, like stuck in the water. And they fished the eagle out with a stick, put him on their boat, rowed him to the shore, fed him some fish, and then, left him on his merry way. And I thought that was like, that's like peak human compassion right there. Because I don't think any other animal could have fished an eagle out of the water and rowed him back to, the shore and gave him some food and set him up for success again. So that right there, that kind of compassion, that's like, yeah, that's just, I mean, I'm
Oh,
not, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, but even your little story the other day about rescuing the spider from somebody who wanted to squash the spider, was that your story at work or
Yeah,
something?
yeah. Well, there's a few
Yeah,
of them there. A few people there just wrote
mm,
wrote stuff
yeah,
down that they did. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
That's the thing. Um,
yeah.
all
There's
right.
just no words for that. That's just beautiful. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. This is the thing, I mean, I don't mean to sound in any grandiose way, but we are gods, and it's about time we realised it, but not in the way of some nutter who's standing in the street proclaiming that he's, the second coming of Jesus or something, but you know, uh, that
yeah.
that
That
we're
itself. Oh, go ahead.
no, it's okay. I wasn't sure how to finish it anyway.
Oh,
Go on.
yeah. I mean, that itself is, another one of those things where, you know, humanity realizes its consciousness is God instead of
Mm,
trying to be God by being immortal in the physical realm by,
mm,
destroying the planet. So realizing that, and just, realizing we are instead of trying to be, I think is also, another one of those things you gotta, um, or one of those things that got us here. Yeah.
Actually, that's really well put. Yeah, thanks. So that's a very helpful way to think about it. Yeah. Yeah, because I think that relates to a lot of at a lower level. This some of the discourse that Hugh was having about transhumanism and also transgender as well, where people are trying to transform and not realizing that it's a spiritual transformation they want, and instead substituting a lesser transformation. And it's kind of a parallel there to what you were saying, in realizing that we are God instead of trying to behave like gods and control everything like God. To realize that if we knew we were God, we wouldn't feel that urge to be managing everything. To be, I think the telltale sign of the error is if there's a lot of effort and energy going into influencing things, because my impression is that God, creation is like effortless. That it occurs. It doesn't require all this sort of stress and focus and tension and all these things that human beings engage in order to create in their own little way.
Yeah,
But
creation's
yeah,
more like a kid playing. Like that's how I sort of see it. It's sort of like play and innocence. Yeah.
yeah. No, what you said there earlier was brilliant. That was really great. We are instead of trying to. Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah, that I think I got that from I mean not that exact idea, but I thought of it because a long time ago when I used to play video games, I played this game where you literally have to fight a war god that's trying to destroy the world. And
Mm,
the war god's whole thing is building machines, and he's literally trying to like kill these elemental dragons and absorb their power so he can become the most powerful of all the gods. And so what you have to do to beat him is you have to team up with like the nature dragon and with her defeat him. Yeah, so I sort of thought
mm,
about that, and
mm.
I think like that war god in that video game is like a perfect representation of our civilization, just trying to burn everything and destroy it and become the most powerful god.
Yeah, yeah. Because of course the whole thing about trying and putting effort is all alien cortex control stuff. You know, if we just let go of it. Um, yeah. Is this a good place to end now that we've just sort of? Is there anybody else got anything they want to add before we pass some kind of a record for the length of the meeting?
Oh no, I must go out and bring my dog out. So he's waiting. So I'm going to. Yeah.
We'll get the 6 hour mark eventually. Just kidding.
Oh.
Oh dear. Yeah. Well, it is. I mean, Mike and Sophie and I started 3 hours ago, so
Yes.
we had a head start. Um,
But you see, the
mm,
meetings get better, and the second part, I mean, the first hour is nearly just a warm up, or kind of we're getting to see what we're interested in, we're connecting, we're sort of searching our interests, and then things start coming out, and then we get really going. And now, look, it's 3 hours, and that's when it's enriching. So isn't that great? You know, it doesn't
Well,
matter the time.
what we
It's not the
maybe
clock.
just maybe once a year we should set up a meeting with the intention that it will go all day
Or
and come
24
prepared.
hours. And somebody can,
Yeah,
we can sleep on turns like on a boat, you know, you can take kind of watches and, you know.
well, yeah. No, I was thinking of like, making sure that you've got your sandwiches packed, and several cups of coffee ready to just to get, and and then just let the meeting go until everybody drops dead and just see what comes of it.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Oh, another thing we could probably do is like, I don't know, stream a movie once in a while. That'd be cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, one thing that might be good, uh, another idea is to pick a particularly interesting YouTube discussion and just go through it a bit at a time and pause it and discuss and then play a little bit and then and come back to it. I'm thinking in particular of that one that discussion, the Ted Kaczynski one that was just posted recently, because there are just so many fascinating things in that one. Kaczynski, Elul, and the Future of Anti-Tech Radicalism, which is on YouTube channel Hermetics Podcast, 2nd of the 2nd, 22. If anyone wants, anyway, that's on the Reddit. But
Oh, that was on the, okay,
uh,
yeah. If that was on the Reddit, I
yeah,
listened to that one. It was pretty good.
yeah, it was pretty good. Yeah, it's pretty cool. But a video like that is one where we could listen to a little bit of it and then pause it and really go into part of it and then just start it again and we probably need someone's permission to use their video like that. I'm not sure.
That's a really good
But
idea. But you remember, I don't know who on this call was there, but the first danse macabre, as we call it, that was at the beginning of the lockdown, I think. And there was somebody, I can't remember who's it, Lady Ella, who decided to have a party called
that's
Danse
right.
Macabre.
Yeah,
And we
yeah.
all
She
met.
invent. Yeah.
Yeah, and there was
Mm.
Hugh, and there was you, me. I can't remember who else was you there, DB. I'm not sure. And there was another woman. I'm not sure who was there. And we all
Oh, that
dressed
was.
up, and we had wine, and we put on music,
Yeah,
and we had a
yeah.
party online because we were all like, it was the beginning of the lockdown, and I don't know, we had a few hours. We were just laughing and drinking and listening to music. It was very funny. Of course, it was not recorded at the time, but it was the first Danse Macabre thing that we started. I don't know, was it on Jitsi or was it on Zoom at the time? But that was a while ago,
I
long time ago.
remember that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I was
Yeah,
there.
I think you were there. I
Yeah.
think you were there. We all dressed up as it was the theme was death. You know, it was like we was, I don't
Yeah.
know, we were just
Well, this is where I mean, Lady Ella's bequest to us was the name. I think it was she came up with the name, or Hugh and her came up with the name. I mean, it was a pity because she um, she really shot herself in the foot. She could have still been part of the group, but she was going to insist on her particular ideology, and it just became ridiculous in the end.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, but it was a good
so,
evening though. It was because we were
oh yeah,
just,
yeah, yeah,
we
yeah.
didn't talk about anything serious. We're playing silly music and just, drinking.
Mm,
And
mm.
yeah.
Oh, this is reminding me a little bit of, I want to recommend a movie if anyone can see this movie. It's called Cloud Atlas.
Oh,
Um,
yeah,
yeah,
I've
that
Oh
seen it.
movie.
yeah, yeah.
That movie
Mm.
is really good. Basically, it's about like resistance against oppression through, all these stages of time. I don't want to spoil the movie, but my interpretation of the end, it has a lot to do with what he was going for in his arc. But Yeah, the whole nowhere and elsewhere. I kind of interpreted it that way,
It's
but
an old movie, isn't it? I've seen it years
yeah, it's
ago.
3 hours. It's a 3-hour movie.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. Very long. Okay. Okay. I can't.
Yeah, I mean, there's a book too, but I don't. The book is better than the movie, obviously, but I don't want to recommend it because it's 600 pages.
Oh God. Oh well. Yeah. Okay. Well, if nobody else is going, I've got to go. I'm so
I
tired.
think we should, yeah, because
So
otherwise it's going to cut off again, and we're going to have to, because it's
yeah,
in a few minutes. It's going to be the 3 hours.
All right. I'll,
So is Mike gonna pair up
yeah.
Nama Iti
Oh,
and
yeah. I forgot. Okay, let's pause for a moment. All right. And to end it, Om Paramane Nama Iti. All right. Thanks, everyone.
thanks,
I'll
Mike.
stop the recording.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Gary.
Okay.